20 years ago today, on August 9th, 1999, marked the debut of Chris Jericho in the WWE. I could not resist coming up here and doing a This Day in History segment on this debut because this is my favorite professional wrestling debut of all time. For a couple of different reasons. Number one, I'm a big fan of Chris Jericho's, always have been, even way before his WWE days. And number two, the Attitude Era in the mid to late 90s were a very fun and special time for me as a wrestling fan. As a matter of fact, in the year of 1999 alone, I attended 3, count 'em, pay-per-views: WrestleMania 15, King of the Ring, and Unforgiven. And even though I'm a lifelong fan, I'm not really sure if there's ever been a time in my life where I've been a bigger fan than I was right around this time when Chris Jericho debuted. So really all we're going to talk about here is my memories of this night and what led up to Jericho coming to the WWE, how he fared when he first got there, and any other random thoughts I might have about this. It absolutely blows my mind that this was 20 years ago, 2 decades ago, that Jericho came in. And right around this time, the internet was now underway. You had some websites out there. A lot of dirt sheets were still very prevalent in wrestling. Hotlines were a big deal. I even had my own hotline for a short time right around this time in 1999 and 2000. And a lot of fans by this point were pretty much in the know. When guys were going to jump ship, if contracts were up and things like that, it was almost common knowledge by this point, by the time we got to 1999. So the fact that Chris Jericho was coming into the WWE was not surprising. His debut, oddly enough, was not surprising either. Many fans knew that it was going to be Jericho. As a matter of fact, this Monday Night Raw on August 9th was held in Chicago at the Rosemount, or whatever it's called now. Same building as WrestleMania 13 and Money in the Bank 2011 and WrestleMania 22 and all sorts of crazy TV shows and pay-per-views. It is the perfect building for Chris Jericho to have this debut. I remember the internet reports. I remember what the dirt sheets were saying at the time. Chris Jericho had pretty much wrapped up business in WCW. He had not been around for a while. You could smell it. You could see the writing on the wall. You could tell that he was going to be heading to the WWE. That's where he wanted to be. And as a wrestling fan, that's where I wanted him to be. You know, I felt Chris Jericho was wasted in a place like WCW, and I thought he was tailor-made. His look, his attitude, his charisma was tailor-made for WWE. He was one of those guys, much like a Steve Austin and a Mick Foley and lots of other guys that flourished in the WWE. Guys like that, WCW many times, more often than not, had no clue whatsoever what to do with. And Jericho was a perfect example of that. And Jericho's gone on to tell stories in shoot interviews, in WWE DVD documentaries, in all of his books. When he talks about leaving WCW, he wanted out. He was already in his mind heading to WWE a year before his contract was even up in WCW. So he basically had to suffer through all that shit. So if Jericho had another year, let's say, left on his WCW contract, I don't know how over Jericho would have gotten in WWE. I don't know what a big star he would have become. I'm sure he would have been big, but he would have been getting there after the Radicals had already established themselves, and that could have hurt Jericho in the long run. So I am so relieved and so thankful looking back that Jericho was able to come to WWE at this time and almost get a head start on everybody else. I think it helped him immensely. Leading up to this Monday Night Raw in Chicago, I think everybody knew that August 9th would be the night that the countdown clock ended. And like I said, most people did assume this was going to be Chris Jericho. I even remember reading dirt sheet reports about WWE possibly repackaging Chris Jericho, because that was one thing that was in the back of my mind. Is he going to come in as Chris Jericho? Are they going to let him use that name? And I remember one specific report saying that WWE was thinking about changing Jericho's name to Excalibur, which when I heard that, I was freaked out. That freaked me out almost as much as the rumors of a green Kane costume when he was potentially going to join DX. So when I heard this Excalibur rumor, I got really nervous that WWE was going to do something stupid with Chris Jericho, and boy, were we wrong. They set this thing up perfectly. I think the countdown clock ended at the top of the first hour, or the beginning of the second hour, I should say, on this Monday Night Raw. The Rock was in the ring. Rock came out to cut a promo on the Big Show and challenge him to a match. And right in the middle of his promo on the Big Show, the countdown clock shows up on the Tron. It's counting down from like 10 or 15 seconds. And the crowd just oohed and ahed. I remember I was on the edge of my seat. I was so excited for this. I remember my heart was racing. I was marking out. Huge. I remember it like it was yesterday. I watched this as it happened. And of course, the lights go out. big pyro explosion, and then the music starts. A very early, primitive version of Jericho's Break the Walls Down song that he would use and revamp a few times throughout his career in WWE. And one of my most favorite and memorable things about this is when the music starts and the words Jericho flash on the Titantron, the pop that the audience gave, the reaction that just that simple word of Jericho got from the audience was one of the most, it might not have been the loudest pop of all time. It might not be Triple H's return in 2002. It might not be Hulk Hogan's return in 2002. It might not be Stone Cold showing up to help Mankind beat The Rock for the title, but it was definitely up there with the most memorable and the most genuine reaction from the audience. We were fucking thrilled knowing that Jericho was going to be there, and now he had a chance to succeed. And look at how they are debuting him. He is interrupting The Rock. Aside from Steve Austin, he is the biggest star in the company. What a better way to debut a talent than have him show up and confront The Rock? And the lights go out, the music hits, Jericho flashes on the screen, and then the lights come out, and Jericho is standing there, arms out, back to the crowd. The crowd just went nuts. He pulls the microphone to his face and he says, "Welcome to Raw is Jericho." Turns around, walks up to the stage, huge reaction from the crowd, goes on to say that Raw and WWE have become boring and stale, and Jericho's here to save us. And this would be a reoccurring theme throughout Jericho's entire career. He would come back to save us several times. He always wanted to be the savior. He says the show has been reduced to ridiculous segments and matches, and he's here to straighten things out. And he did a pretty good job. You know, as a matter of fact, I can't believe I'm going to do this because WWE has pulled down a couple of my videos in the past due to copyright. So I don't know why I'm going to promote these assholes. But I'm going to put a link right up there in the top right-hand corner of Chris Jericho's debut that is on WWE's YouTube channel. So if you want to check out just the debut, The Rock's promo, Jericho interrupting, and The Rock's response, it's all right there. It's about 9 minutes long. And I'll put the link up there to you if you have never seen it. If for any reason you are a younger fan, or you've been living under a rock or at the bottom of the ocean, and you've never seen this debut, it is worth a look. It will be the best 9 minutes of your life. Jericho coming into a stage like this and interacting with a star to that magnitude, I thought he carried himself very well. Don't forget this guy was doing jack shit in WCW. You know, he wasn't even really able to work with Goldberg aside from that silly little feud they had. But Jericho was never in the ring with Hogan or Savage or guys like that. So coming into the WWE and interacting with The Rock on the first night, you know, WWE had some plans, I think, for Chris Jericho. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute because a lot of this would go downhill right after Jericho's debut, and he would have a few issues and run into a few issues in WWE. But for this night and his debut, it was great. And The Rock's response was even better. You know, he lets Jericho talk, and then he asks Jericho, "What is your name?" And he hits him with the "it doesn't matter," hit him with all the normal Rock catchphrases, and one of the funniest ones was when he says, you know, "You think you can just come out here because just a couple of months ago you were down south beating some jabroni named Juventud?" Oh, that was great. I thought that was hilarious. And Hoovy would take exception to this. You know, Hoovy would jump right on this opportunity in WCW, the fact that he got a shout out from The Rock. He was very excited about that. And then he started going on Nitro and impersonating The Rock, doing The Rock mannerisms, moving his face with his hand and trying to do a people's eyebrow and all that shit. Hoovy got so excited. He got such a rock-hard, raging, mega-huge boner over The Rock's shout-out that he could not let it go. And Jericho, of course, was also coining himself Y2J. So now there, instead of the Y2K plan, he's got the Y2J plan. And The Rock countered that by saying he has a KY jelly plan, and he's going to lube up his size 22 boot and stick it straight up Jericho's candy ass. And it was so much fun. Jericho was doing a few things weird. He was making a lot of weird facial expressions. This was probably stuff that was directed by WWE to do because they didn't really know what they had here. And they were also kind of billing Jericho as like a nuisance. Jim Ross probably called Jericho a nuisance 2 or 3 times on TV. As a matter of fact, I think Jericho would do a run-in in The Rock's match later on, and you could hear Jim Ross going, "There's that nuisance again." So they basically wanted to make Jericho like an annoying guy, somebody that came out there and just interrupted everybody, because he would start doing this. He would interrupt a lot of people. I think he would interrupt the Road Dogg, I think, maybe, or something at SummerSlam. So this would become a pattern for him, and I guess he was just basically going to be an annoying guy that pissed everybody off. Maybe not a credible worker right off the bat. And things would be rough for Jericho the first couple of months there. He talks extensively about this in his book and in shoot interviews, that he was kind of struggling to get over. He had a little bit of heat in the locker room. You know, Triple H might have received a phone call from Kevin Nash or maybe some of his other buddies in WCW saying, hey, watch out for this guy. And I think Jericho kind of had an uphill battle right from the start. But, you know, as the story goes, you know, he had some heat. Vince McMahon didn't really like his work, and they started kind of de-pushing Chris a little bit for a couple of months. He would then become co-holders of the Intercontinental title with China, which I thought was a horrible idea. And it took him a little while to get rolling in WWE. He would have that big victory on Raw a few months later in early 2000, where he would actually defeat Triple H for the WWE title, only to have it taken away from him. So his first few months there were really touch and go, and they did not match what he did on this first night with The Rock. But man, when you look back and you judge this debut by itself, it was so amazingly incredible. And it's crazy that it's been 20 years. You know, I still get goosebumps, you know, when The Rock is in the ring and the countdown clock comes on and the lights go out, the pop Jericho gets from the crowd. All of that is still extremely exciting to watch, even 20 years later, which is why I highly recommend going back and watching this if you haven't seen it in a while, or maybe going back and watching it for the first time. Definitely do it. You won't be disappointed. But what do you guys think? How many of you were watching wrestling during this time 20 years ago? You know, those of you who might be closer to me in age, what are your memories of this night? What do you remember hearing? Do you remember hearing the same shit I did? Did you know it was going to be Chris Jericho? Were you genuinely surprised when he turned up? I'm kind of curious what the overall reaction from you guys was when this was going down. Chris Jericho has had an extraordinary career. As a matter of fact, he's getting a world title shot in AEW in just a couple of weeks at All Out. So the fact that he is still here as a 30-year veteran, still kicking ass and still wrestling at a high level is amazing. And a lot of that can be potentially traced back to this debut. Because had he not come to WWE, had he stayed in WCW, had he only come into WWE for a couple of years and left, he may not have become the megastar that he turned out to be. You know, the best thing Jericho ever did was come to the WWE. Because in WCW, he was a nobody, he was a cruiserweight at best, you know, or a crybaby. Where in WWE, he was the first ever undisputed champion, beat The Rock and Stone Cold in the same night. Still loves to talk about that to this day. And that's just something I don't believe he would have ever been able to accomplish in WCW. So anyway, kind of a quick This Day in History segment, but I wanted to come up here and talk for just a few minutes about one of my favorite nights in the history of the wrestling business and my favorite debut in the history of wrestling. I'll be up here on Sunday reacting to the SummerSlam 2019 pay-per-view, so make sure you come join. Y'all be good, and I'll talk to you real soon. Peace.